What's going on, everyone? I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 169 of the Adult Education Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with psychologist, author, and entrepreneur Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic. Happy New Year, everybody. I know it's a little late into the year for me to be saying that, but I haven't spoken to you all yet, so I did want to make sure that I wished you the best. Did you make any New Year's resolutions this year? Is there something you want to be better about or that you want to work on? Maybe one of your goals was to be more successful at work or to find a new job. Today's conversation may be just for you. Authenticity was the word of the year in 2023. Everyone wanted to be their authentic selves. So what does that mean? For some, it's about staying true to your beliefs, to your morals, and ethics. For others, it's about portraying an image of themselves that they want people to see, that whole speak your truth kind of thing. But what if I told you that being authentic, especially in the workplace, was the wrong way to go? Today's conversation is with psychologist and author Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic. He's written a book called Don't Be Yourself: Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. Now, before you switch off this podcast, because I know people get really fired up with authenticity, I think you might want to hear what he has to say. When I first saw the book, I figured I'd poke a lot of holes in his theories, but I found that I was actually agreeing with a lot of what he had to say. Staying true to yourself is important, but a work environment often needs us to adapt to the world around us. Tomas and I speak about understanding what is needed of us at work, when we should stick to our morals, and how managers have a difficult balancing act. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that. I'm speaking with Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic. I'm going to air this interview at the very start of 2026 because I feel like this is the perfect conversation to start a January when everyone is starting to rethink how they're going to be and start to change their lives around.
There you go. So maybe without starting this convo, sounding too much like a party pooper, but let me tell you, for most of our listeners, there's a high probability that the person they are in at the end of 2025, it's still the person they are at the beginning of 2026. So actually, there is a certain element of timelessness about this conversation.
I agree with you. And I do think there's a lot going on here. First of all, let me say the name of the book. The book is Don't Be Yourself: Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. And I saw the title of the book when I was speaking with someone from the publisher, and I was like, okay, this sounds fascinating because it is the antithesis to everything that we're told in this world. Don't be yourself. That's not what people are being told ever right now. Everybody is being told to be themselves. So tell me the background. Why did you think this was a good topic to dive into?
Yeah, and I don't take credit for the title. Whether you like it or not is definitely an attention-grabbing title, which works both ways. That was the publisher's idea. I've kind of been thinking about authenticity for many, many years. I spent a lot of time coaching mostly leaders and executives. And if you look at both the science of coaching and the practice of actually doing it, to a large degree, all coaching is an attempt to help people not become an exaggerated version of themselves, right? So if I'm coaching you, I will be kind of poking around your psychological habits and muscles, and there's probably stuff that you're overdoing and that you should learn to not overdo. And by and large, there's a high probability that you need to develop new habits, sort of like becoming a more expanded, broader, richer, or diverse version of yourself. That's the first one, right? So in a way, we shouldn't be limited by our past and present self when we have this beautiful opportunity to become someone else that maybe matches even our idealized or kind of a fantasized aspirational self. The second one is that, as I argue in the book, typically the authenticity advice can be broken down into a range of mantras that are actually at odds with what the science of effective interpersonal functioning suggests. So for example, the notion that you shouldn't worry about what people think of you. If you think you're great, you are. And, if you actually spend any time thinking about how others see you, you're some kind of a mindless sheep and conformist and, a loser. Actually, the most successful and effective people do a great job understanding how they impact others. And when they don't like how they're seen by others, they have an opportunity to change, the opinions of others, meaning they engage in successful or strategic impression management. Another one, which sounds almost like impossible to refute or discredit, is this notion that we should always be uncompromisingly true to our values, no matter what. That sounds great, but what if your values are toxic? What if you're, I don't know, a racist, a sexist? What if you're a fascist? Same with like bring your whole self to work. It's like, your whole self probably includes grumpy you, impulsive you, opinionated you. And most employers, even if they ask you or tell you that you can bring your whole self, actually they want to see your best self, which will involve a fair amount of editing, self-editing. So you can see that, if the agreement is, well, you should try to find the balance between the right to express yourself or for self-expression, but also take into account what your obligation to others is. I'm okay with that. But if we are just celebrating or worshiping unhinged, uncensored, raw authenticity, that's actually quite toxic.
Let's dive right into this, actually, because you got there faster than I thought we were going to. But this idea of I'm speaking my truth, I'm giving you my true self. Yeah. I feel, and this could be wrong, but this is my impression, that a lot of this really started to take hold of the culture with the social media growth, because now we find ourselves in these echo chambers where you can be surrounded by people all times of the day that believe, like if you believe the earth is flat, you can turn on your phone and you can be around millions of other people that truly believe the earth is flat. And then you're like, well, that's my truth. My truth is the earth is flat. And that's a very difficult thing to battle back with when you're surrounded by that. It's hard to understand when someone says to you, well, wait a second.
Exactly. And I think, I do think social media has exacerbated or amplified the issue. If you like, it's sort of like throwing gasoline or fuel to the fire. But platforms wouldn't exist, and algorithms, that feed or lubricate our ego and make us feel that we are right, even when we are more and more detached from reality, wouldn't exist either if we didn't have this inherent or natural righteous appetite for feeling that we are right and others are wrong. But they do have a role to play. And of course, everybody is entitled to their opinion, but not all opinions are equally valid. There is this thing called reality, which doesn't just go away or evaporate just because you don't look at it or you stop thinking about it. And in some areas of life, it is actually quite tricky to find it because things are not so clear cut. But I would argue, I don't know if you agree with me, that if we're all so self-centered that all we do is to kind of broadcast our unsolicited views about anything, and we're kind of rarely right but never in doubt, it's very hard to negotiate meaning in a way that can actually bring us together, So I think even at a kind of a very, very kind of mundane and everyday level, which is how most people interact with others at work, whether it's in virtual or analog settings, I do think that if we lose the capacity to at least even entertain the possibility that our opinions are wrong and our values might not be the best values, we're doomed, because we'll only be talking to ourselves or the algorithms that function as our echo chamber and filter bubble. And, surprise, surprise, then we complain that the world is very polarized and tribalized.
Right, exactly. Here we are being a part of it, and we're complaining about it at the same time. I found myself continuously going back to this idea of EQ, or emotional intelligence, throughout your book, because I feel like that's a lot of what you're talking about. It's the ability for someone to sort of read the room, so to speak. You walk into your job or you walk into an environment, and you have to understand what's going on to be able to input and fit into that group.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is that usually people who love the concept of EQ, emotional intelligence, also love the concept of authenticity. And as I highlight in the book, they're often at odds or in tension, with each other, if not mutually exclusive, because EQ is all about empathy, which is about understanding and caring about how other people think and feel. It's about adjusting your behavior to display kindness, consideration, and to really fundamentally understand where the right to be you ends and your obligation to others begins. If we go, back 50, 60 years, there's a very famous sociologist called Erving Goffman, and he talked about life being a stage, and he said, which sounds controversial because, he alluded to impression management, but the reality is that every significant sort of aspect of life is social or interpersonal. And in every interpersonal setting, even when you're vacationing with your best friends, your closest friends, or your partner, your romantic partner, with whom you might have spent many, many years, and you are, maybe is the closest person to you, you're still going to make an effort to respect that. You're probably not going to use their toothbrush. If you do, there's a high chance that a probability that it might end up in divorce. So you always make an effort. And Goffman said, we're always acting, but there's basically two different kinds of acting. One is surface acting, which is, when you go to bars or restaurant and you see poor waiters or bar people who are so robotic, kind of playing the script that the fast food chain or the restaurant is. Hi, hello, I'm Joey. I'm your server today. How are you? It's great to see you, and I'm really happy to see you. And you're like, relax, because it's painful. That's called emotional labor. And clearly, they would rather be somewhere else. And we are kind of so snobby that we would like service with a smile, but it has to be an authentic smile. So we demand, that they truly like us. And then the other one is what Goffman called deep acting, which is really interesting because deep acting is like you're a method actor, you're in character. When you really identify with your job because you love your job, you think that the professional version of you is an integral part of your identity. And you're so happy that you're motivated and you work hard. But this is just a story that you have told yourself. It's not more real than anything else. Equally, great salespeople truly believe in the product they're selling. People who interview really well, they go to an interview, and when they tell others that, they're the best thing since sliced bread or that they are a stable genius, they might really believe it, which might get them very, very far. But the ability to kind of deceive yourself can be contagious, which doesn't mean that people who seem authentic are actually, more self-aware. Often is the opposite. Again, so here we say sometimes self-awareness can actually compromise authenticity. If I go to an interview and you tell me, what do you think about this job? And I'm like, to be honest with you, I've never done this before. I don't know if I can, but I'll try very hard to learn the skills I need to perform. 10 out of 10 out of honesty, 10 out of 10 out of authenticity, 10 out of 10 out of self-awareness, I'm probably not going to get the job.
I gotta tell you, that literally just happened to me, and not in a job interview, but I was let go by my large corporation a couple of months ago during corporate budget cuts to wrap up the year. Wrap up the year by firing people to boost your stock price. So I was taking a look or having some conversations with folks, and they were asking me how I was able to use XYZ program. I said, I've seen it, I've used it, but I'm not an expert. And they said, don't say that. And I was like, I'm just being honest. I know what it looks like, and I'm sure that I can be taught to use it with one lesson. Like, I don't think it's going to take me much time, but I just want you to know, like, I don't know all of the ins and outs, you know what I mean? But they were like, please don't say that in the interview.
Yeah. And this happens also when people tell you, and it might be a manager or a boss, I'm all about feedback. I'm all about radical candor, honesty. Please tell me what you think. It doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. It's like, okay, boss, I think you sucked at this presentation. Or actually, here's some constructive feedback. This is how I would have approached it differently. Or you have an opportunity to do it. It's like, and then they get angry with you, right? Because the reality is most people prefer fake feedback that is positive than honest feedback that is negative. And yet, if the fake feedback is so blatantly fake that others see you as a fraud or a phony, you pay a high price. So the trick is not in being your unfiltered or uncensored version of yourself. It's also not in being, a blatantly fake politician. It's in engaging in a skilled self-presentation that lets people see who you are and how you're different from others, and lets people feel that you are trustworthy and somewhat authentic, but at the same time, you're paying great attention to how you impact others, and you look after their feelings, emotions, and thoughts.
The idea of authenticity at work and bringing your true self to work, so to speak, I feel like this, it is a newer idea if you look back at the history of work and employment in general, because the job didn't used to mean as much to people as it does now. That used to be the kind of thing you woke up in the morning, you went there, you did your work to get money to pay the bills, and that was it. You had other social things that you took part in, but as jobs have shifted and as work has become a much more integral part of our lives, the idea of bringing our life to work has become a more popular concept. Am I kind of on the right timeline here?
Absolutely. And this is important, because it's a reminder that we've come a long way. We've come a long way. 100 years ago, the best case scenario, if you had a job, would have been that you're an assembly line worker. Okay, you can be the owner of the factory, but that's, very few people, and maybe the person managing that. But the majority of people would have worked in a factory, clocked in and out. It would have been unthinkable for any of us to return home, and when our spouse or partner asked us, hey, how was your day at the office? We wouldn't have said, it was all right, but I didn't, find my true north or experience a sense of calling, or I didn't, find myself. So I need to quit or quietly quit. As working conditions improved, and they have, our expectations keep improving in turn. So, the thought that if your boss or CEO says something that isn't aligned with your values, you need to quit and find another job is unrealistic. And by the way, if you think that like that, then join a cult, not a culture.
Yeah.
At the same time, this is responsible. This idea or expectation is responsible for our inability to work or collaborate with other people because they don't agree with us politically, or they come from different walks of life. And also for managers hiring people who are just like themselves, and so on. I think we need to kind of recalibrate and get the balance right. Yeah, it's great if you find meaning at work and if you identify with your professional self, but don't have unrealistic expectations. There's always going to be some elements of work that are painful, that are tedious, that you have to work in order to add value to your team and your organization. And by the way, if you don't like this, you always have the choice to work for yourself. You can be like Elon Musk and be the richest man in the world and own your social media platform, and then get high at 3 a.m. and call people wherever you want, and nobody will hold you accountable, and maybe that's okay, but you better have the talents to back it up. Most people are not as brilliant, at least, or talented at making money and at accumulating this level of freedom and power that helps them behave like that. I would question also whether it's good role modeling behavior. But anyway, there's a difference between Elon Musk and most of us, and that is we have to do as we are told and find ways to kind of edit ourselves in order to please our managers, our bosses, and contribute to the wider collective.
Where is there, okay, this is one thing I was having a hard time with, because I agree with a lot of the things that you're saying. There are a few things that I would push back on, but my struggle is where we start to have an issue with accountability and credibility. If we're not bringing our authentic self, at what point do I feel like I'm not credible anymore? You talked about, managers shouldn't have to necessarily come out and explain everything they believe, and then you can decide if you want to work there. But let's say I'm pro-choice. If I'm working for a company I find out is making billions of dollars in donations to pro-life organizations, I don't really want to work there, or I'm going to feel like I'm not credible anymore, or I don't feel right anymore. So where is that line?
Yeah, and I think, for everybody, that is bound to happen, right? There should be some foundational core values or coordinates of your moral compass that you should not compromise on. The dangers come when you start to think of every single attitude and belief you have as that, right? And it's very easy today to pick one thing, like being pro-choice or not pro-choice, and out of one single thing, or pro-guns or anti-guns or not pro-guns, that quickly spirals into a constellation of attitudes that, makes us unable to speak to people unless, I'm still fundamentally an optimist. I think, when you're delayed, when your flight is late and you're sitting in an airport bar and you start making conversation with the person next to you, which in the US happens a lot, and thank God it still happens, you might start the conversation by finding common ground, comment on the sports that is on the TV, complain about the airline, complain about, the airport, etc., talk a little bit about what you do. And at some point, inevitably, the other person might say something that is far from your moral. You're not going to stand up and leave and say, this conversation is over, right? You're not going to unfriend them or block them or, like troll them. I mean, you're going to make an effort to find common ground. And I think that's what's important. So, it might be that in some instances, of course, if climate is very important for you and you're working for a company that is very at the other extreme of the spectrum, could you do it? Should you do it? Probably not. By the way, a lot of people have the ability to do it and they still have their attitudes. I think we went from too much flexibility, if you like, to too much rigidity. And that rigidity is often self-imposed. So all I'm saying with the book is that, it's quite healthy now and then to entertain our attitudes, including our core values, and at least have the ability to collaborate and work with people who think differently, right? On your first point, though, I think if you're a manager or an employee and you're so fake that it's very clear to others that you can't be trusted and that that's not your real you, you'll pay a price. At the same time, if you're a manager and, you suffer from total lack of self-editing, think of shows like The Office, right? Yeah. Whether it's the UK version, David Brent, or the US version, Michael Scott. It's really funny to see that, sometimes cringeworthy funny, because they're not our boss. There are a lot of managers like that. And when they think they're funny, they're offensive. When they think, they're vulnerable or transparent, it's too much information, right? Oh, yeah. So I'm not saying we become like top-down command and control, military, cold, robotic leaders, no. But I'm saying that we may have swung the pendulum into too much of the other direction.
You mentioned, and I want to just take a quick step back because you talked about people like Elon Musk, for example, and in your book, you talk about how authenticity is a privilege of the elite. And I thought that was so interesting, and it took me a minute. I had to stop reading and just sit back and kind of just go on that for a minute to really let it sink in. And boy, you are so right. Like people who have the money, they have that power, they can essentially be whoever they want. Like whatever self they want to be, they can be. But someone like me who has to go into the working world every day to still survive, there is an element of inauthenticity, if you will, that I have to put out there every day.
Exactly. And it works on all levels. And, of course, and I mean, people now talk about Elon Musk, but, think about Steve Jobs, who sure. Most people now see as a kind of much softer and pro-social version of Elon Musk. He was very obnoxious. I mean, he was a jerk by most standards, got fired from his own companies twice, was parking in a disabled parking spot. I mean, there's very little to like about him. Then, he became a little bit milder and he actually learned to edit himself. It works in an organization. If you're part of the in-group and part of the management or part of the people that represent the majority, you can probably talk quite freely about what you did on the weekend and crack jokes and you don't have to edit it. If you're part of the out-group, ironically, we're telling you, just be you and relax, and actually you pay a much higher price to do it. By the way, women are not as free to be themselves in any environment as men are, even though they are technically the majority, And we keep telling them, oh, just be you, don't worry. When they are, it's like, no. It's only men that can do it. I give you a very funny but vivid personal example.
Please.
My mother, who is pushing 80, and she's by no means powerful, but, when you get to a certain age, you just can't be bothered to do what people tell you. And I'm sure most mothers, especially mothers-in-law or fathers-in-law or fathers, are like that, right? And we tolerate it a little bit more on people who are older because it's like, But actually, that comes with the power that age, wisdom, seniority confers you, So it doesn't have to be like that. I would argue that it's especially true when you are a leader and you are in a powerful position and you are the status quo or the privileged elite, that you have an obligation to censor yourself and to be a good role model for others, because otherwise, you're going to treat little people in a very bad way. You can do it, you can get away from it, but it's a pretty shitty thing to do, And not everybody, of course, does it. And that line that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It basically is about this. The more power you have, the more freedom you have to just be you and not care about what other people think of you. But, it's it's a shame for everybody else.
I'm learning about you through this book. So I did not know your history, but I've found you have written many other books but prior to this. And there's one about leadership. And I have found leadership to be such a fascinating topic over these last 10 to 15 years, because I think there's a serious lack of leadership. I think we got ourselves into a position where it was just, well, you've been here the longest, so you get to take the top position. There's not necessarily qualifications. And you talk a lot about leaders in this book as well. And one of the things you talk about is maybe if you're a leader, you shouldn't be authentic, because now you have to understand that you have to manage a whole series of people that are all going to be different as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're a leader, it's very simple. You should work very hard to be seen as authentic. People want to look at you and they want to believe you, and they want to think that you are for real, and they want to, believe the person that they imagine you are. By the way, this is no different from watching, I don't know, Forrest Gump, and you think Tom Hanks is Forrest Gump. Well, he's not. But if you pause after 5 minutes and say, you know what, he's just an actor, then there's no point watching the movie, right? We do the same with leaders. We fantasize about who they are, and you have to construct a professional version of yourself that is as believable as Tom Hanks or Meryl Streep. At the same time, you have to be on guard most of the time, and you have to keep your own biases in check, because the easiest thing to do, back to The Office and Michael Scott, is to be friends with the people who are like you and celebrate your jokes and think like you and have your same attitude. That will annihilate everybody else, and that will also antagonize others, which is why it's so problematic for leaders to say, I'm going to speak up on the Middle East, Ukraine, climate change, pro-choice, abortion, guns. You can do it, but inevitably that means you're creating a mini cult, the cult of you, or otherwise, you're not going to be that inclusive or leverage the richness of cognitive and intellectual diversity. And on the other hand, when you do it, you have to do it with skills. So, I always have this little question that I ask people, do you think Trump is authentic? And, usually people, if they like Trump, they say, yeah. If they don't, they're like, oh, no. And then you ask, do you think Obama is authentic? And you get exactly the same, but politically reverse. There is no way of knowing how real and authentic they are. But what we can agree on is that both of them have constructed a professional version of themselves that seems very real to their base. And, I'm sure, and I like to think and hope that when they get home and unwind and talk to, Melania and Michelle, they are somewhat different. Otherwise, it will be kind of but they're spending most of the time being method actors. And that's a good model, and that's why it's a hard job to be a leader. And of course, that's why we are kind of also celebrating vulnerability, because sometimes it's too much. And sometimes we allow for leaders to show that they're no superheroes, and to say, listen, to tell you the truth, I'm under a lot of stress and pressure now, and I have no idea how to deal with it. But there's a difference between doing it in small doses and doing it all the time. If you're doing it all the time, you shouldn't be in charge.
Here's where, and you just hit on something that we kind of talked about at the beginning, but this is where the thing that kills me is I want to speak my truth. And there comes a point where you create a story about yourself that isn't necessarily true. You talk about Donald Trump, for example, and I'm not trying to pick on the guy, but I think there's a lot over the years where he's been told these things from other people, and he's been at a high level for so long that there are things about himself that may not be true, but he genuinely believes them. So he gives off this authentic persona about it, but it's not factual. And that's where I think I have a hard time with it, because you're not really speaking. Yeah, I guess you're speaking your truth, but your truth is a lie.
Yes, but you can also make a different interpretation. And when I know that it's very difficult to be seen as apolitical when you're discussing these figures, but at least my intention is to do it psychologically.
And I think you do a great job in the book being apolitical. Like I appreciate your bluntness in the book. Yeah.
Which sometimes means you annoy both sides equally, because they're represented. But my version is somewhat different. Is like only in a world in which the political class has lost any credibility because they were not seen as authentic and not real, can people gravitate towards these figures. He's not the only example. I come from Argentina. We have an even more exaggerated version of that. These anti-establishment heroes, which is ironic because he comes from the establishment, but that basically stick it to the man and use pretty blunt antisocial style and language to kind of demolish elites or institutions. And, you know, I have this vivid memory in the second presidential election that he went on. A lot of people said, you know, we know he lies and that, you know, he might be corrupt and, you know, that he, like, you know, he's a crook and he has this, but at least he's honest.
Right.
Which is a fantastic description, right? Because, and you know, and people tell you, well, you have to interpret him at a high level. You know, I mean, of course, you cannot fact check him and whatever. But this is honest in the sense that actually there's some consistency between what he tells you he wants to do and what he's doing. And you might not like it, but you know, if you go bit by bit now, especially during this campaign, what he said he wanted to do is what he's doing, which is why when people say he's totally unpredictable, so far the unpredictable thing is that he's actually quite predictable.
Yeah.
But anyway, you know, it's there. You cannot cater to everybody. You have to cater to your base, and I think that in essence, people will trust you not if they assess on a granular or micro level the veracity of what you say, but if they can predict what you're going to do. And that's important, right? Because whether you're on one side or the other, if people feel that they can predict that you're going to act in a way that has their own interests at heart, they're going to support you. And how you get to that, there's very different styles, you know. Obama and Trump are at the opposite end stylistically, but they probably have a similar impact on their base, which I find super interesting.
I want to touch on feedback again really quick before we wrap things up here, because I was in a unique position for about 25 years working in broadcast radio where we got constant feedback from people. You know, they would listen to our tapes from being on the air and give us the feedback, and it's never comfortable. It never feels good in the moment, but it's something that you grow to love because you're like, okay, I can be better because they are telling me how I can be better. Like, this is very helpful, but most people don't see that, and they take feedback as a very, very negative thing.
Yeah, feedback is so rich. You know, I have a very close personal friend and colleague who passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, but he was an expert, a French psychologist called Stéphane Mouriot, and he was an expert in feedback, and he used to wear this very ugly sweater in his presentations, and he was very kind of an engaging speaker, and he would say, this is the sweater that my aunt knitted for me. And it was horrible, you know, more embarrassing than a Christmas sweater. And he used to say, think of feedback as the same thing. Is like a gift. Yeah, feedback is a gift. It's a gift that somebody gives you. And in the best cases, it's itchy and ugly and unpleasant. And, you know, but you have to own it. And if you actually pay attention to it and own it and receive it, it will make you a better person. And so, you know, the only way we have to improve is to close the gap between the person we think we are and the person we actually are. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there's no way to know who we actually are. Maybe Neuralink, going back to Neuralink, Elon Musk will tell us, hopefully not, because it sounds very like an episode of Black Mirror.
Black Mirror, yeah.
The best proxy for that is how other people see us. You know, your reputation is the best measure or model for who you are. And if you ask 10, 15, 20 people who work with you over these 20 years what you're like, that's a far more reliable model to predict what it is to work with you than if I asked you. But if you paid attention to what people told you over the years, not just your colleagues, but also your listeners, they're probably quite similar. And, you know, what is self-awareness is internalizing your reputation. And what is social skills is convincing other people to change their views of you and to change your reputation. So, you know, whatever you want to do with feedback, we have to agree on one thing, that ignoring how people see you and what people think of you is not going to make you better.
My favorite are the people that ask for feedback, but they don't get what they want to hear, and they continue to ask other people until they get. It's kind of like when a kid goes up to their mom and says, "Mom, can I have some candy?" Yeah. Mom says no, and then the kid goes to dad, and dad's like, "Sure, have candy." Like, you keep going until you get someone that tells you what you want to hear.
Well, and I have a true story. There was a senior leader who I was coaching, and you know, in a session with him and some of his team, he actually said, look, I hear you talk very positively of 360-degree feedback survey, right? So 360s were, in essence, anonymous or anonymous feedback, where you as the manager are rated by their team, their subordinates, direct reports, the reports of the reports, your peers, your boss, etc. And he actually told me, you know, I hear you. I'm surprised you like this, because I said the manager. I had not very good experiences with it. So, is there anything else that I can do to know myself? Because, should I ask other people? It was literally like, the 5-year-old kid who has been told, no, you can't have candy by the mom, and therefore goes and runs to the mom. And after that, to the grandparents, right? And, so it is painful. Also, because we live in a world that is mostly pro-social, and now the problems we have at work are mostly first world problems. Actually, it's not so easy for people to tell you that you're not good at something, and so you have to make it easy for them. You have to build trust, you have to build safety, you have to say, look, don't be nice, tell me what could I have done differently, because I feel bad about this sales call, client presentation, podcast, program. And that's where friends are a good example of that. If I'm your close friends, I'm going to say that was awful. And we're going to be friends. But you can't expect your colleague who you just met 2 weeks ago to do that. So, feedback is a gift. Giving it is an art, and receiving it is maybe a strength.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a very difficult thing to get used to. But when you do finally get that mindset of accepting the feedback, it really is life changing. I mean, it's eye opening.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And and also you should understand that it's great to receive positive feedback, but it doesn't change anything, right?
Yeah.
If you do this show and people tell you, oh, you were amazing, okay, you can't grow. You're gonna be a copy paste version of yourself.
Whenever somebody will tell me, and this is maybe a fault of my own because I am too hard on myself sometimes, but whenever somebody will tell me they liked a podcast I did, or I'm always like, no, be honest. Tell me what I did wrong. Like, don't sugarcoat it and make me feel good. I need to know how I can get better moving forward.
And I think if everybody thinks about critical or seminal, influential, career-changing moments that they had in their lives, whether they are starting, in the middle, or finishing, it usually was in the form of a statement or a soundbite that was uncomfortable. When you heard, you know what, you're actually not very good at this, or you're not very funny. And of course, a lot of people are immune to this. I have this line in my book that is something along the lines of like, the more you ignore people telling you that you suck, the more you will suck. And the more other people know that you suck and you're aware of the fact that you suck, the more you will suck in turn. So I think it's important to have some connection with reality, and that usually is people who can give you a different perspective from what you have in mind already. By the way, when you are a professional and you have done this a long time, you can predict the feedback that people are going to give you. And this applies to everything, by the way. I always use as an example, I use my Oura ring, which tells me about my sleep. I've been using it for 4 or 5 years. And right now, if I had a late night and too much to eat or drink, or I'm jet lagged, I don't look at my sleep score the next day.
I don't need this.
And I already feel bad, but I feel some weird sort of like pleasure in saying, I'm not going to look at you and listen to you. It's like your super ego can be a wearable, or it can be your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your friends. And, but if you don't need to listen to them because you already know, it means you've internalized feedback a long time.
Well, Tomas, listen, this has been a great conversation and a really interesting book. I'll be honest, when I first saw the title, I was like, what is this guy going to be talking about? This is crazy. But the more I read it, I was like, wow, this is very insightful, very interesting stuff. So I hope people, maybe you're looking to make some changes in your work life in this new year. I hope people take a look at it. It's really interesting. Leaders especially, because I think you can find a lot of stuff from a leadership standpoint here. It's called Don't Be Yourself, Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. Tomas, where can people go if they want to find out more about you, or if they want to learn more about your other books?
Yeah. So all books are on Amazon, but the easiest way to find, more about my work is to go to my website, which is drtomas.com, and that's drtomas.com, and they'll find all the stuff that I work on, and videos, talks, books, articles can be found there.
Well, I feel bad now. I didn't call you Dr. Tomas anywhere in this conversation.
Well, Tomas.com was taken, so I had to add the DR.
I like it. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I know you've done a lot of traveling lately, so I appreciate you squeezing me in here. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and I hope that our paths cross again in the near future.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Big thank you to Dr. Tomas. His book, Don't Be Yourself, Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead, is available now. And thank you to all of you for listening today. This is the first episode of 2026, and I think we're going to have a big year here on the Adult Education Podcast. So I hope you stick around. Until next week, be well.